I don't know how many of you people watched the Denver Broncos take on the New Orleans Saints last night on Thursday Night Football, but the Broncos came out with a pretty resounding 33-10 victory. But the reason I'm bringing up that game is because of the fact it had two rookie quarterbacks, and their names are Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler. And if you were to tell me, I don't know, a few years ago, when Spencer Rattler was in his first year at starter in Oklahoma, where everybody was talking about him being the most talented quarterback Lincoln Riley had ever worked with. And this is a guy who had worked with the likes of Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, the latter two winning a freaking Heisman, and Jalen Hurts going to the Heisman ceremony. I just remember sitting there like hearing about how talented Spencer Rattler was. And if you were to tell me a few years in the future that him and the quarterback from Auburn were going to face off against each other in an NFL football game, one was a 12th overall pick, one was a 5th round draft pick, I would have told you that Spencer Rattler was more likely to be the 12th overall pick in the draft and Bo Nix was more likely to be a 5th round draft pick. But that's how crazy time is. That's how crazy the NFL draft is. It's another example of why the NFL draft is not an exact science, nowhere close to an exact science. Like around that time, Bo Nix was the Auburn prodigal son. Like he went to Auburn versus Oregon in the national championship game when Cam Newton was there. He was there at the game. He's Auburn through and through. He bleeds blue and orange. Like he is just all about Auburn football. But at his time at Auburn, we just never saw it fully click. There were spurts, yes, but for the most part, nothing ever really clicked with Bo Nix. We'd see the highs, then all of a sudden we just crashed down instantly. Like right as we were about to see like the best of Bo Nix, like, oh, this is the guy everybody was talking about when he first walked onto the campus. Then we go down and go like, how the hell is this guy starting for an SEC program? And then eventually, both guys transferred. Rattler, after getting benched against Texas back-to-back years, once for Tanner Mordecai and the other one for Caleb Williams, ended up transferring to South Carolina. Bo Nix goes up to Oregon. Like, it just was an insane turn of events, pretty much. And at that point, you were kind of like, well, shit, what the hell's going to happen to their guys' draft stock now? I did not expect Spencer Rattler to go over to Oklahoma, or go over to South Carolina, but I think he had some sort of connection there. I can't remember where the exact connection was at South Carolina. They were over from Oklahoma. I don't remember exactly what it was, but their draft stock was not necessarily the highest when they started their first season at those respected schools. But Bo Nix's first season at Oregon, lit the world alight. Like, I believe he led the nation in total touchdowns, passing and rushing touchdowns. But despite that, people, including myself even, were sitting there like, I remember watching him at Auburn. So I'm kind of nervous about this Bo Nix that I'm seeing now at Oregon, that I don't know what to think about this guy. And then Spencer Rattler, early on in his first season in South Carolina, was like, that's the guy that everybody hyped up at Oklahoma? That's not the same guy that we saw as what was it, his redshirt freshman or true sophomore year, whatever year it was at Oklahoma, the year he got benched for Tanner Mordecai against Texas. But as the season went on, you saw Spencer Rattler grow with the team. The offense started clicking a little more. And those last few games of the season, like, oh, Spencer Rattler still does have some talent in there. There were some people even suggesting he go to the NFL after that brief little stint at the end of the season, where it was like 3 or 4 games where they played the likes of Clemson, Notre Dame, and a few other teams in there. And he was playing really, really well. I think Tennessee was in there as well. I think he had like 6 touchdowns against Tennessee. I could be completely wrong about that, but that's how my brain's working right now. And then Bo Nix, you see his last few games at Oregon, early that middle part of the season, people started actually turning it, going like, okay, this is good. Now their draft stock's starting to raise again. And then going into last season, both of them are considered to be potential top 10 quarterbacks. You thought I was going to say top 10 picks, didn't you? No, top 10 quarterbacks in the draft. I think we had Spencer Rattler like 10A or 10B going into the season. Bo Nix, I want to say we had around like 7. But that's just crazy how time works. Like Kenny Pickett, I know we bring up this draft class quite a bit, but the 2021 draft class, no one thought Kenny Pickett was going to be a top prospect in that draft class going into that season. But as the season progressed, he became the top prospect in the draft, and now he's a backup in Philadelphia. And Malik Willis was in that draft class. Desmond Ridder. That draft class can get talked about a lot because that just shows the unpredictability of the draft. And you look at last year's draft too, same exact thing. I don't think everybody knew last year's draft class that had Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler, and a few other guys in there, obviously, that it was going to be a good draft class. But it was mostly spearheaded at the start of the season by Drake May and Caleb Williams, in whatever order you wanted, because there was a time period where they were like, Drake May, he could be the number 1 overall pick if he plays well enough, but he didn't have like in an insane year or anything, so that gave Caleb Williams. And Caleb Williams got the generational tag thrown him and all that stuff, and then Jaden Daniels popped up in there. But as good as that draft class looked on paper at the start of the season, I don't think a lot of people were expecting 6 quarterbacks to go in the first round, let alone 6 quarterbacks go in the first 12 picks of the draft. That is insane. 5 of them went in the top 10. Bo Nix was the only quarterback in that first round that did not go in the top 10. And after Caleb Williams, I'm pretty sure he was the next quarterback to be announced as a starter. I can't remember if it was him or Jaden Daniels was announced as a starter first. But regardless, that is an insane turn of events from the draft. Bo Nix at Auburn was not even seen as a draftable prospect, and now we're drafting him 12th overall. Spencer Rattler is arguably the most talented quarterback on paper that Lincoln Riley has ever coached, and now he's a 5th-round draft pick. And a lot of that stuff with the 5th-round draft pick, like Spencer Rattler's got a bunch of talent in there, but from what I gathered, the main reason he dropped down to the 5th round was not the main reason, but one of the reasons he dropped all the way down to the 5th round was because of that video that circulated when he was in high school, where he was just giving that one dude a really, really hard time. I was like, wow, this kid's a freaking douchebag. Like I think that kind of held him back a little bit for some teams. But he's gotten chances to start in the NFL thanks to Derek Carr being hurt. He had a really weird game last week. Like the Saints were down, 24-0? And then they went down a 27-point run, and then they got a 27-point run put right on top of them. Like, it was just a really insane game. In that first few, I think the first 4 drives of the game for the Saints offense were either 3-and-outs or interceptions. Like, it was just a insane first start for Spencer Rattler. And it looked like, wow, they were down by a lot, and now they're leading the game at halftime. This is insane. But then the Buccaneers woke up, and I think the final score was, 51-27? And then Bo Nix has had a really up and down rookie year so far, but that was kind of expected with how many weapons, or the lack thereof of weapons, the Denver Broncos have at their disposal. But he's got talent. He's a smart quarterback. He's a quick decision maker, and that's what Sean Payton really likes. But like I brought up with Spencer Rattler and the whole quarterback thing and the whole the video thing, every single thing that you have ever done when it comes to the NFL draft will be brought up either for you or against you come draft time. They always say the NFL Combine is the biggest job interview in the world, and 90% of it has nothing to do with on-the-field stuff. Unless you're an insane freakazoid quarterback like Anthony Richardson, Joe Milton, Josh Allen, where it's like, oh my God, my jaw's on the freaking floor watching you throw a football. Unless you're that, the NFL Combine, most of it revolves around the interview process. And obviously, it's different for each position, but for a quarterback position, 90% of it revolves around the interview process. Because you want to see what type of guy you're going to have hopefully changing your franchise. You don't want to take a guy in the first round that you think's got character concerns or injury concerns. You want to get the nitty-gritty down with them and ask them about every little thing that they have done throughout their entire life up to this point. And that's why we've brought up the Shedeur Sanders, the social media stuff, where he's calling out his offensive line after the loss against Nebraska. Just the distractions around Shedeur Sanders, whether it's good or bad, and whether you actually think those are legit concerns or not, if you think he's got some growing up to do or something. But that's why this time is so important in regards to figuring out who's the top guys in this draft class. On the field, though, Shedeur Sanders is by far one of the most talented quarterbacks in this draft. And depending on who you ask, the top quarterbacks in this draft are either Shedeur Sanders or Cameron Ward from Miami. Those are the top 2 guys in the draft class, at least in my opinion. And we'll get to those guys here in a little bit, but I want to go over the honorable mention section here first before we get in to the top 10 of our Week 7 quarterback prospect rating. So we got Brady Cook on here from Missouri. He went 14-19 for 219 with 2 touchdowns in a really weird 45-3 win against Massachusetts. And why I say it was a really weird game is just because of the fact Missouri in Week 7 is going to play Massachusetts at Massachusetts. That just seems really odd. I know there's home-and-home things like that, but Missouri was a top 10 program, top 15 program going into the season, and Massachusetts, it's Massachusetts. So I didn't really expect to see Missouri going there, especially in the midway point of the season, but here we are. Luther Burden had himself a nice game. But yeah, Brady Cook's on there. Dylan Gabriel for the win against Ohio State. He had 341 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, also had a rushing touchdown in there in the win. Cade Klubnik for Clemson against Wake Forest, 49-14 was the final. He had 309 passing yards, 3 touchdowns in the game, with also 30 yards on the ground. Kyle McCord from Syracuse comes in at the next honorable mention slot. 31 of 42, 346, 2 tuds against NC State, and a 24-17 win on the road against NC State. Kyle McCord right now, 19 touchdowns, 6 interceptions to this point in the season. Definitely, if I had to say who number 11 was on this list, he would probably be number 11. Him or Curtis Rourke would probably be number 11 on this list. But I didn't mention Curtis Rourke in this blog post just because Curtis Rourke was on a bye week. So I just wanted to bring up quarterbacks that had played this weekend. So the final quarterback on this list is Miller Moss. 20 for 34, 220 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and an interception in a crazy-ass game at home against Penn State on the season. 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, also has a rushing touchdown in there as well. Reminder that these guys in the honorable mention section are not ranked in any particular order. It is just by last name. Alphabetical order by last name. I guess that is ranked by particular order, but it's not. They're not in like number 11, number 12, number 13, number 14, number 15, so on and so forth. That's not what it is. It's just alphabetical order. So, yeah, those are the honorable mentions section. Again, Kyle McCord is creeping ever so closely to that list, and we talked about this last week, where the conversation around Kyle McCord and Will Howard is very interesting. It's very, very interesting stuff. Like, Will Howard replaced Kyle McCord at Ohio State, made Kyle McCord transfer to Syracuse, and right now we are sitting here like, is Kyle McCord the better quarterback than Will Howard? And the short answer is, I don't know. They provide two different things to their teams. Will Howard's a much better athlete, but Kyle McCord is showing some very good stuff throwing the football. Will Howard had a very solid game. We'll talk about Will Howard here in a little bit, but number 10 on this list, 4 total touchdowns in the game, 31 yards rushing, 229 yards passing. Riley Leonard from Notre Dame with a 49-7 win against Stanford this past weekend. And Riley Leonard this weekend, 135 college quarterbacks FBS quarterbacks played in week 7. Only 3 of them had 3 touchdowns off play action. Carson Beck from Georgia, Luke Altmaier from Illinois, and Riley Leonard from Notre Dame. Leonard was 7 out of 10 with 105 yards passing with 3 touchdowns on play action versus Stanford. That's impressive stuff. The last 3 games he's had for Notre Dame, yes, 182 yards passing a game is not like eye-watering or anything, but 6 touchdowns, no picks after starting off the season with no passing touchdowns. That's pretty damn impressive, along with 75 yards rushing per game, 7.3 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games for Notre Dame. So you got to look at the whole numbers, not just the passing numbers, because again, 182 yards passing per game is nothing like spectacular, but you add in the rushing yards as well, and he's just a freaking problem for defenses. Against the blitz, this past weekend against Stanford, 12 for 13, 184 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no picks, and a 158.3 passer rating. And I hear you sitting there going like, well, Logan, it's just against Stanford. I really don't care if it's against Stanford. If you're playing a bad team and you are a quote-unquote good quarterback or a good team, I need to see you have these types of performances against bad teams. It's all fine and dandy to beat bad teams, but I want to see you assert your dominance. Don't play with your food type thing. And Riley Leonard didn't. Like, again, Kyle McCord's right there at number 11. Curtis Rourke's also mentioned in that category, but Riley Leonard, I just like the dog. Riley Leonard's a guy that teammates rally around. Because it doesn't matter if he's hurt, doesn't matter if he's playing well or not, he's going to go out there and play. He's just going to go out there and play and try to put his team in the best position to win games, regardless of what happens to him. And these past few weeks, he has played really, really well. So I think he's worthy of being number 10 on this list. Number 9, keeping his spot from last week, is Will Howard. We brought up Kyle McCord, Will Howard. I've said Kyle McCord's name a lot for him not being in the top 10. But Will Howard, what sucks for Will Howard is that a lot of times, especially with prospects and just players in general, the last thing you do is what people remember about that game. Like, I remember A.J. Terrell, completely different position, cornerback, getting drafted in 2020. He got drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. He's had a very good career so far with the Falcons. But when he got drafted, everybody kind of shook their heads a little bit because the last game A.J. Terrell played in college was against LSU and Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and he got freaking baked. He got cooked. So everybody looked at that pick like, oh, wow, remember what he did against LSU? And it's like, with all due respect, LSU was doing that to every corner in college football. And with even more all due respect, those 2 receivers, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, are doing that to professional athletes now, not just college athletes. So it's just the last thing you do is a lot of things people remember. Like Will Howard, the last thing people remember is him sliding down with the clock running out. And if he slides down a second or two earlier, then we're talking about a really heads-up play from Will Howard to get them back into field goal range. And if he gets down sooner and they're able to call a timeout and they make the kick, we're looking at this game completely differently. We're talking about Will Howard being this brainiac from the quarterback position. But as things stand, he got down too late. They couldn't call a timeout. And everybody remembers that play from Will Howard like, oh my God, what the hell were you thinking type thing. Like, I remember going on Twitter the day after and searching Will Howard. The first two things that popped up was, I think, Will Howard stupid and Will Howard death threats. Those were the first two things that popped up in the Twitter search bar when it came to Will Howard. That's ridiculous. Because Will Howard had himself a very good game on the road against Oregon. He had 2 passing touchdowns, had a rushing touchdown in there as well. 326 yards passing in the game. Like, he had put forth a very solid performance in Autzen Stadium against the number 3 team in the nation in Oregon. Like, this was a very hostile environment for him to go into. And Ohio State has the players, yes, but you need your quarterback to step up in these types of situations, and he did. Yes, he had one play where it kind of like you kind of scratch your head a little bit, but I don't want that to take away from the overall game that Will Howard had against Oregon because he played very solid. And again, if he gets down earlier and Ohio State makes the kick, then we're looking at this game completely differently. But as things stand, again, we have had back-to-back weeks where quarterbacks have either run out of bounds or slid with no time remaining in the game. That's not really something you want to see. So based off patterns, we might see something like that this weekend. But time will, of course, tell on that. But Will Howard comes in at number 9. Number 8, we've got Jackson Dart keeping his spot from last week. We talked about this where, if you look at last week, we talked about Jackson Dart and Ole Miss not really having the same numbers, the same feel that they had in the early portion of the season. Like those first 4 weeks of the season, sure, they didn't beat a bunch of world beaters, but they were putting up insane numbers. Jackson Dart was putting up an insane amount of yards, insane amount of touchdowns. But these past 3 weeks, he's got 2 total touchdowns, and I believe 2 interceptions in there. Maybe 1 interception. I can't remember the exact number in there. But regardless, he hasn't been playing at the same clip that we expected to see once SEC play started. I know the SEC kicking off is going to be more intense and all that, but it's not like you played Alabama and Georgia and Texas and all those teams in there. No, you played Kentucky and South Carolina and LSU. I know LSU's a top 15 team now, top 10 team, but no disrespect to Kentucky and South Carolina, but I kind of expected Ole Miss to go in there, especially at home against Kentucky, to go in there and come away with a win, and they lost the game. Like, those types of things are kind of just like head-scratching. In this game, I wouldn't say Jackson Dart played bad. I wouldn't say he played bad, but in the same breath, I wouldn't say he or played well either. And what's kind of funny about these types of games, and kind of sad depending on how you want to look at it, if you're in these types of games where you're a top quarterback in the draft class, you have got a game against another top quarterback in the draft class, in this case, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Sometimes whoever wins this game, their draft prospects, like their, their stock rises immensely just because their team won the game. I don't subscribe to the wins or a quarterback stat thing, but sometimes to people out there, that can boost them up immensely because they won the game. Remember the old saying, history is written by the winners. And in this case, Jackson Dart lost the game. But I wouldn't say Jackson Dart had a bad game. It just wasn't the same like dominating game that we saw earlier in the same good dominating stuff that we saw earlier in the season. But I thought he made some very nice throws throughout the game. He had a couple shots down the middle of the field to some receivers that were between a few LSU defenders. And you could go like, well, maybe if he led them a little bit more, maybe they result in touchdowns. But in the same breath, you're like, there's 3 or 4 LSU defenders in the area. Maybe it's best just underthrow him a little bit and have the receiver come back towards the ball so the defenders can't make a play on the ball. And he had a touchdown pass in this game to Trey Harris where he just threw it up there. And there's an immense amount of trust between Dart and Trey Harris. Like earlier in the season, or before, I think it was the offseason, Trey Harris said him and Jackson Dart are the best duo in college football. I think Jackson Dart a couple weeks ago called Trey Harris the best receiver in college football. It doesn't matter if Trey Harris has a drop in there. If he's on one-on-one coverage in the end zone, Jackson Dart's going to give him every chance to come down with the ball. And he did. It wasn't like the most amazing throw from Jackson Dart, but he put it in a spot where his receiver can make a play. Remember, let your playmakers make plays. He did that, and Harris came down with the touchdown. Jackson Dart also did have an interception in this game. It was kind of a weird play. Because if he put a little bit more on this ball, it's probably a touchdown. Probably is a touchdown. But the problem is he underthrew the ball. Receiver had a step on the defenders, But when I say defenders, I'm not talking about one or two. I'm talking about like 4 or 5 LSU defenders in the area. He underthrew the ball, easily intercepted, going the other direction. Like, again, if he just put a little bit more on the ball, then we're looking at that as like, oh, what a touchdown throw from Jackson Dart. He also had a couple big runs in the game as well. But all in all, it resulted in a loss. He had the quote after the game, like, I don't understand how we lost this game. And you had people on Twitter saying he looks like he's gonna go around and kill a bunch of younglings. Like, it was just like that part was kind of weird. That part with the hood up and the press conference and all that stuff. I know you're sad that you lost, but you're being a little bit melodramatic. And I can respect that, because losing games like this is never fun. Especially when you had a lot of hype going into the season. The last two of the last 3 games you've lost by 3 points. So I can understand there's a little bit of frustration there. They're on a bye this week. So, yeah, they're going to need to get back to the drawing board. Who do they play this coming weekend? South Carolina. Or no, not South Carolina. I don't remember who they played. Oklahoma. So that should be an interesting game for them. Oklahoma just got beat up by Texas this past weekend, so they're rallying a little bit. Oklahoma's playing South Carolina this weekend, so we'll see how they bounce back from that. Could be a top 25 matchup there. Who the hell knows? But I would like to see Ole Miss bounce back from this game against LSU. Number 7 is Drew Aller, dropping down 1 spot, 391 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. One of those interceptions, though, was a Hail Mary at the end of the game. I'm not too concerned about that. Doesn't really move anything for me. He did have, not great interceptions. Like, there was one interception where he just kind of I really don't know what he was looking at, because if the first USC defender, I think this was the second interception he had, if he hit the first USC defender who's standing in front of the Penn State receiver, if he doesn't throw the pick to that guy, then the ball bounces up in the air, and there's 2 other USC defenders in the area to go and pick the ball off. Like, it's just not an ideal situation, not really the most ideal situation out there, but I thought overall, he played well. I thought he played well despite the 3 interceptions in this game, because what you want to see from your quarterback is when they have a rough first half, like he did in this game, like Carson Beck did against Alabama, how do they grow from that? How do they get better? Their shoulders shrink, or do they grow with the game? And in this case, I would say Drew Aller grew with the game, because he had some massive 4th down conversions for Penn State in order to get them to overtime. Like, he had a 4th and 7 situation where he zipped it into, I think, to Julian Fleming, just absolutely zipped it in there. And then the next play on 4th and 10, Julian Fleming again, USC brought the freaking house. They had an unmarked blitzer coming up the middle, and Drew Aller moved around the pocket, hit Julian Fleming. I want to say it was pretty much the exact same play, but Drew Aller was moving around a little bit more this time. But that's the kind of things you want to see from your quarterback growing in the game. I did have to move him down 1 spot, and it's kind of funny that we talked about winners and losers, rise and fall in the draft process, stuff like that, but Garrett Nussmeier I have at number 6, moving up 1 spot in these rankings. He had 2 interceptions in this game. He completed 40-something% of his passes in this game. He had 22 of 51 in this game. This was just the full Garrett Nussmeier experience. Like, like early on in the game, he threw an interception where it hit off of Will Campbell's face. He was trying to hit the running back in the flat, and he threw the ball right off his left tackle's face and ended up in the grateful arms of an Ole Miss defender. But he had so many big-time throws in this game. Like, there's one throw he had in the back of the end zone. He places to Lacey and gets a 25-yard gain out of it. Like, there's throws like that. Just make you go, oh, wow, he's really impressive quarterback. There's throws where he's moving around the pocket really well, stepping up, sliding over to the left, drilling the ball downfield. You look at his passing touchdown, just on a freaking seam. There was an incompletion that he had in this game to freaking Avian Thomas, who couldn't come up with the ball. Or Xavier Thomas, sorry. He couldn't come up with the ball, but it was a great throw from Nussmeier. Like, his incompletion, some of these incompletions were just fantastic throws that the receiver just couldn't come down with. Like, that's what you want to see. And then you got the throw to Aaron Anderson down the sideline. Just as such an anticipatory throw. I would make a case for Garrett Nussmeier probably being the most anticipatory thrower in college football right now. I know that might be a crazy thing to say, but the amount of zip he gets on the ball when a receiver is blanketed or receiver is behind a defender, like his touchdown pass that he had the touchdown pass he had to Aaron Anderson before overtime, he's nowhere near the play. Anderson is. There's 2 Ole Miss defenders on him, and there's 1 defender in front of him. Garrett Nussmeier throws this ball while he's behind a defender. He throws him open. And that's what you want to see from your quarterback, being anticipatory. Not letting incompletions and drops and all that stuff hurt them. Interceptions hurt them, especially stupid interceptions like smacking the ball off your lineman's head and landing the arms of the defender. That's what you want to see from your quarterback. In the first play of overtime, they knew what they needed to do. Ole Miss had a very odd overtime period. Ole Miss had a few odd plays. I think they had like a 4th and 29 situation, a 3rd 37, and then they started going backwards on the first play of overtime with a holding call. Like a holding call that came after they went backwards on the first play regardless. Like it was just there was a few rough areas for Ole Miss in this game, but that overtime play, like they know what they need to do. They need to score a touchdown. So what do? First play of overtime, no screwing around. Let's just throw a touchdown pass. Let's end this game. Let's get out of here. But again, Garrett Nussmeier, he might not have completed an insane clip of passes in this game, but he was pressured 21 times and didn't take a single sack. With that, he is now one of only 3 players in the last 3 seasons to face 20-plus pressures in a game without being sacked. And the amount of times he moved around in the pocket and adjusted in the pocket through while he is still moving. And he picked up a big first down as well, deep in their own territory. 3rd and 13, he picked up 14 yards on the ground. And Garrett Nussmeier, believe me, is not known for his running ability. But you wouldn't know on that play. No, you wouldn't know on that play because it wasn't great. But still, I thought he played the completion percentage is not ideal. But if you watch the game, he made a lot of really big throws for LSU. So I had to raise him up at least one spot in this ranking. Drew Aller and Garrett Nussmeier, I thought, had their statistics. Their passing yards are good. Touchdowns are good. The interception's not great. The completion percentage is not really that great. But I like seeing those types of games for quarterbacks. I had a hard time deciding who I wanted in that 6th spot, and I eventually sided with Nussmeier. But Drew Aller, I thought, played well, especially growing with the game, despite the 3 interceptions. But again, one of those with a Hail Mary, so I'm not too concerned about that. Number 5 on this list, his first game back in freaking forever, Quinn Ewers. Nice to see you. And you could tell early on in this game that this was his first game back. You could freaking tell. First drive of the game. Has a receiver cutting across the middle of the field, wide ass open. Could have been a big time gain. And Quinn Ewers, just absolutely airmails the pass. And then you see on that Texas next drive of the game. He has another chance to hit a deep play. I think it's Isaiah Bond. I could be mistaken, but I believe it was Isaiah Bond down the middle of the field for Oklahoma. In the middle of the field between Oklahoma's defense, He has a step on everybody. He finds the gap in between the 2 safeties, and Quinn Ewers underthrows the shit out of the ball. That's the second drive of the game. Absolutely underthrows this shit out of the football. But in this type of game, Oklahoma, I think I said this last week, Oklahoma just doesn't have the same feel that Oklahoma had in previous years. Well, I woke up on Saturday morning feeling very confident that Texas would be able to cover the 14.5-point spread that they had in this game. Even with Ewers coming back in his first game, Oklahoma just doesn't do anything that wows me at this point, especially since they're starting a true freshman quarterback in this game. Like, every time Hawkins did something wrong, they'd cut over to the sideline and pan to Jackson Arnold. Like, it was just every single time he did something, Jackson Arnold's right there, and they're going to focus on him. But Quinn Ewers this game, he had a nice little sideline pass to DeAndre Moore for 26 yards, but overall, Quinn Ewers just had a fine game. You could tell it was his first game back. He had a passing touchdown, interception, had a rushing touchdown in there as well. He kept it from like a yard or 2 out, maybe 5, somewhere between the 5 and end zone. I don't remember the exact yardage for the rushing touchdown, but had a rushing touchdown there. Just didn't really do a whole lot great, didn't really do a whole lot bad, just had a solid-ish game and didn't do anything too stupid apart from the first 2 drives of the game. But I would give that off to Rust because he has been out for the last 2.5 games. So there's going to be some rust, and there was a bye week in there as well. So there's going to be some rust in there, and we saw that early. And as the game grew, he got better, but nothing spectacular. But he still comes in at number 5. It was just nice to see Quinn Ewers back in this game. Number 4 is Jalen Milroe, who's had an insane run these past couple weeks. Beat Georgia, had an insane game against Georgia, had over 370 yards passing, over 110 yards rushing against the Georgia defense. You're up 28-0 in the blink of an eye. Like, if you went to go to the bathroom, let's say it was a pusher. It was a hard one. You come back to that game, it's 28-0. You're like, what the hell happened? You have no idea what happened. And Alabama goes on to win the game. The next week, they go out and lose to Vanderbilt, which I don't think Jalen Milroe was that bad. Though he wasn't great, I don't think he was that bad. And then you got this game against South Carolina where Alabama tried their damnedest to lose this game. They tried their hardest, and Jalen Milroe did not have a good game. He did not look great in this game. He caused some problems for the South Carolina defense running the ball. Yeah, he'll always do that running the ball. Like, he had a nice 27-yard gain, and I think it was Jam Miller got absolutely popped on one of his running plays. Absolutely freaking popped. And then he had 2 interceptions in this game. One coming right before halftime. And it was almost housed for a pick 6. And South Carolina ended up getting a field goal out of it. But I don't know what he was looking at in this throw. Like, there's a very narrow window for him to fit that ball in. When I say narrow window, there's no window to throw in at all. He threw it to the receiver, and the defender just bounced on the route, jumped the route, picked it off, nearly got a pick 6. Because these types of plays where you're late on the throw and the defender has enough time to react and jump the pass, a lot of the times, unless there's not a lot of room to work with, that'll get housed. Thankfully, they pushed him out of bounds to save a touchdown, but 1 second left, was able to get a field goal, make the game a little bit closer. And then South Carolina was up. Jalen Milroe has a chance to give Alabama the lead, and he's late on a throw again. And I would give credit to the South Carolina defender on this one. He threw the interception in the end zone. He saw that he was not going to hit the out route, the tight end. The defender saw he was not going to go to the out route. So the defender in the slot cut back upfield, read it beautifully, read it like a freaking book, and picked off Milroe in the end zone. Like, it wasn't great. It wasn't great, not going to lie. He had some good throws in this game. Like, there's one throw he had to Ryan Williams to get them in the red zone. He had a nice little throw. Who was this to? I'm trying to remember. After moving around the pocket, slanting around. Regardless, he had moments in this game. He's a great athlete, so he's always going to have some highlight plays in there. But 2 weeks ago, we said Jalen Milroe had one hand on the Heisman Trophy. Ever since I said that, he slowly started backing away, like taking his hands, like putting his hands in the air. It's like, ooh, I don't know. I don't really want that. I don't know, Jim. Like one of those types of things. It's a really odd thing to see. Like, he was the odds-on Heisman favorite after beating Georgia because the Heisman's a guaranteed, glorified quarterback award at this point. So he was like, we're not going to see. I said we're not going to see a performance like that the entire year, and we might not. But a quarterback that beats Georgia and loses to Vanderbilt probably is going to win the Heisman, especially after they don't have a great game at home against South Carolina. That's not really what you want to see from a quote-unquote Heisman winner. And they're playing Tennessee this weekend, who is beatable. Texas playing Georgia. I don't know if we talked about that. Who is beatable. Just had to go to overtime against Florida at home. They lost to Arkansas. Like, they're a beatable team. And Alabama's reeling a little bit. They haven't looked great these past 2 weeks. But you know what? We'll see how they do against Tennessee. Number 3 is Carson Beck. He had himself a nice game. Had 2 interceptions in the game as well, and one of them was bad. One of them was not great. One of them came on the second play of the freaking game. And it, like Garrett Nussmeier, it hit off the head of a player. This time it was a South Carolina defender who just timed it perfectly. He jumped right as Carson Beck was about ready to release this ball. Like, right as his arm goes up, the defender jumps, hits him right in the freaking head, and lands in the arms of the defender. The other one, I don't know what he was looking at. He tried to hit Lucky in the end zone, and yeah, he just threw it right into the chest of the defender. Just not a great throw, but these are the types of games overall, minus the interceptions, where you need Carson Beck to step up. Like, we talked about the game against Auburn. He didn't do anything like amazing or anything against Auburn, but he took what the defense gave him, didn't make any dumb throws, was very safe with the football, and that's the kind of things you want to see from your quarterback. Like, after a game like he did against Alabama, where you have the 4 turnovers and the safety, like, you want to see how they bounce back from that. And in this game, you actually saw Carson Beck rip it a little bit. Oh, Mississippi State is one of the worst pass defenses in college football. Like, so this was a time for him to have a great game. And what makes it even crazier is Carson Beck is the first quarterback since Bryce Young in 2021, and just the 6th SEC quarterback in the past 20 years to throw for over 450 yards while also completing 75% of his passes. That's great stuff. That's what you like to see. And you saw him throwing, much like Garrett Nussmeier, he had some crazy incompletions in this game as well. Like, he had a play where he rolled out to the left, reversed back to the right, threw it to Dylan Bell, put it in a perfect spot, just the defender made a nice play on the ball. Like, that's just, shit happens type thing. But those are the type of throws you like to see for your quarterback. Like, how are their incompletions looking good too? And we saw that from him in this game. We saw him throw 3 touchdown passes this game. He had Dylan Bell in the back of the end zone. Dylan Bell, great body control and great field awareness on it as well. Carson Beck also had the hidden ball trick. He hit Arian Smith down the middle of the field. Maybe you could say he overthrew him a little bit, but maybe he thought the route was going to go a little bit more inside. I'm playing devil's advocate here, so play with me a little bit. Maybe he thought the route was going a little bit more inside, and he threw it back that direction, and Smith had to come down with a nice little catch in there. Yes, Juresic hitting him on the sideline was also a very nice play. He had a 42-yard touchdown pass to Arian Smith that we talked about before, where the Mississippi State defender just said, yeah, I'm good. I don't want to tackle him. I really don't know what that whole play was. I would recommend you go and find that clip because I don't know what the defender was doing. And I believe that was Beck's seventh 20-plus yard completion of the game to that point. Like, Beck just had himself a very solid game. He keeps, like, the game against Auburn. Nice, solid game. Get some feet underneath you now. Like, you're still a good quarterback. And then this week, you have the big numbers. You have the showing out in this game. Yes, it was against Mississippi State. Yes, you only won by 10 points, but was anybody like, I went into that, Mississippi State was 34.5-point dogs. I picked Mississippi State to cover because, one, Georgia's not built to absolutely blow out teams, at least this year. And Mississippi State had a solid-ish outing for their standards against Texas. So I was like, and then Texas was a similar-ish favorite to Mississippi State as well. I was just like, I'm going to pick Mississippi State in this one. They did, so I'm not too surprised by that. But I love that Beck had a nice little game like this where he saw him throw for over 450 yards, have 3 touchdowns. Like, that was fun. That was a fun one. Interceptions, not ideal, especially the helmet interception, the throwing right into the defender's chest type thing. But I'm intrigued to see how he does against Texas in Austin. That'll be a really fun matchup. I'm really excited to see that game. And then number 1 and 2, you obviously knew this one was going to happen. It's Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. I'm going to keep Shedeur Sanders at number 2. I thought Shedeur Sanders played really well this past weekend against Kansas State. And I know you're sitting there like, well, Logan, you put Cameron Ward at number 1 after Shedeur Sanders had a bye week. So why not move Shedeur Sanders back to number 1 after he had only 6 incompletions against a number 18 team in the nation, while it was 388 yards passing and 3 touchdowns? Why is he not back to number 1? I was like, well, I just like Cameron Ward. That's the long and short of it. I like Cameron Ward a lot. I think Shedeur Sanders is great. I think these two right now are the best quarterbacks in the class by a decent margin at this point in time. I like Carson Beck. I like Jalen Milroe, but these two guys I think are just a step above everybody at this point in time. And to me, you could put them in any order you want. It doesn't really hurt my feelings either way. Shedeur Sanders made some big-time throws in this game. Like, there was one drive he had where he was throwing absolute heaters. Like, he had one throw to Amarian Miller for 24 yards, and he just ripped it. Absolutely ripped it. And then he had another throw to Miller down the far sideline down the near sideline from the far hash, throwing from the 20 to the opposite 35 on a dot to Amarian Miller for a first down. The only problem was that the very next play he threw an interception. And that was basically because his feet got hit, air-mailed the ball, just landed right in the arms of the defender. But Colorado's defense would come up big, force them to go 3 and out. Colorado would score a touchdown with and then you'd have the picks interception to get them all the way down to 17. He hit, I think it was LeJonte Wester on an out route, take the lead 28 to 24. And they picked up a couple 4th down conversions in this game as well. Shedeur Sanders moving around the pocket. Well, Shedeur Sanders has, I know there's the big gripe about him holding on the ball too long, and he definitely does that. He definitely does. But when he's moving around the pocket, he's got really nice pocket awareness overall. And I've said this before, he's one of the best throwers of the football rolling out to his left, which is not something that you see a lot of right-handed quarterbacks doing that well. If not that well, not as consistently as Shedeur Sanders. That's what I really like to see from him. He made some big-time throws in this game. Big-time throws in this game. He got hit a lot. Took a lot of sacks. I kind of feel weird about that with the sack numbers. Like, if you take a sack that counts towards your rushing total, I don't know if I necessarily like that, but I understand where they're coming from to a certain extent. But it's just rough to see, like, I can see where you're coming from there because I guess he does run the ball, but I don't think that should count to your overall rushing total. I think that's a little bit harsh because seeing Shedeur Sanders finish with negative 50 rushing yards, and he had a few big-time carries in this game, big-time rushes in this game, and just to see him with negative 50 yards, you're like, that's not a great look. That's not the greatest. But you know what? They may have come out with a loss, but I thought this was a very well-rounded game from Colorado. They showed fight, which is something you haven't really seen from Colorado teams in the past, at least in recent history. Like, they were able to come back from 21-7 down. They were able to come back from 24-14 down. They took the lead in the 4th quarter. Kansas State just had a touchdown late. Colorado failed to convert on 4th down. Shedeur Sanders tried to hit, I think, Will Shepard down the far side, near sideline, and just missed him. Like, it's just unfortunate plays like that happened, but I thought Shedeur Sanders played a great game. I think he played a great game. And again, you could put Cam Miller, you could put Cam Ward number 1, you could put Shedeur Sanders number 1. It doesn't really matter to me at this point. It really doesn't. I think those two, again, are just the top 2 guys in the draft class. And I'm intrigued to see how they both look this weekend because Shedeur Sanders and Colorado, they go to Tucson and take on Arizona. And then you got Miami taking on Louisville on the road. So both quarterbacks got road games this weekend. So we're going to need to see how these two dudes do on the road. We saw Cam Ward last week against Cal, and we got Shedeur Sanders against UCF 2 weeks ago on the road. But now that they're together, let's see how they both do on the road at the same time. And they could change. Who the hell knows? But that's my top 10 quarterback range with honorable mentions. Let's go through it again. Number 1 is Cameron Ward. Number 2 is Shedeur Sanders. Number 3 is Carson Beck. Number 4 is Jalen Milroe. Number 5 is Quinn Ewers. Number 6 is Garrett Nussmeier. Number 7 is Drew Allard. Number 8 is Jackson Dart. Number 9 is Will Howard. And number 10 is Riley Leonard with honorable mentions going towards Brady Cook, Dylan Gabriel, Cade Klubnik, Kyle McCord, and Miller Moss. And again, Curtis Rourke didn't play, so I can't put him in there because these guys just played. If he was in the top 10 already, then I could have him in there. But for honorable mention section, I can't put him in because he didn't play. But he plays Nebraska this weekend, so we'll see how that goes. I'm intrigued to see how things change this weekend because there's some big-time matchups this weekend. There are some big games this weekend. I'm really excited to see how these games work out. We are talking about Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas. Those are two insanely insane. Louisville versus Miami, Colorado versus Arizona. Those are fun-ass matchups. So I'm intrigued to see how they do. Now, I'm going to end it there. I'm going to end the quarterback rankings there. Make sure to check out the blog post on the LoganBlackmanShow.com. Check out all the links in the description of the video as well. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll be back to you next week for another edition of the Draft Expert Quarterback Rankings. Peace.